We'll start with a question for Senator Tester from Mike Dennison. He will have a minute to respond, then Representative Rehberg will have a minute to comment, and then Senator Tester will have 30 seconds for a final response. Mike Dennison.
Good evening, Senator Tester.
Good evening, Mike.
I assume that on November 6th, you're going to vote for President Obama. I'd like you to tell us why you support him and why his re-election and your re-election is good for Montana and the country.
Well, I think if you take a look at what the Commander-in-Chief has done as far as taking care of Osama bin Laden, and doing some things in the Middle East to take care of the war on terrorism in a big, big way, I think that's been very, very positive for the country. Look, when he took over, the country was hemorrhaging 800,000 jobs a month. Now, the job growth isn't where we want it to be, but we're certainly starting to see some job growth in the country, and I think that that's been very positive. As far as myself is concerned, I think that the level of responsibility and accountability that I brought to Washington, D.C., and transparency are unmeasured. I was the first person to put my schedule online, first person to do an audit, first person to carry bills that really make Washington, D.C.'s government look a lot like Montana's. Montana's government is very, very open. I think it's open not only for folks like you, Mike, but for folks out in the audience to be able to access databases that tell people what's going on in Washington, D.C. We're 2,000 miles away, and oftentimes access to those databases for letting folks know what's going on critically important. I won't get into wolves or infrastructure or veterans. My time is up.
Thank you. Representative Rehberg, 1 minute.
There are two paths that we can take in this country. Senator Tester and President Obama have taken one path. In fact, he's voted with President Obama 95% of the time. What has that given us? It's given us a health care reform that didn't reform health care. It just added more people to a failed system. It gave us a failed stimulus. And what did it do? The only shovel-ready project that it really funded in a large sort of way was adding an additional $1 trillion debt on our middle class. And it also gave us not necessarily an energy policy, but an environmental policy. And you don't have to look very far down the street to see the closing Corette plant. It's going to cost us 35 jobs. It's going to cost the city of Billings over $10 million a year in income in the surrounding area. It's going to add as much as 25% to our utility bills as you go around the country. And it's the equivalent of shutting off the electricity to 100,000 homes. That's the entire city of Billings. That's the kind of economics that we've gotten from the failed policy of President Obama, and frankly, from the failed policy of Senator Tester.
Senator Tester, you have 30-second response.
Well, thank you, Steve. I want you to notice that Congressman Rehberg didn't ask the question and asked why you should vote for him. The fact of the matter is we have a broken health care system in this country, and we had to take some changes to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions could get health insurance. Folks that get sick and don't get kicked off by insurance companies. So bottom line is we had to hold insurance companies accountable. That's what we did. As far as the stimulus package goes, we may be getting into these questions later in the debate, I don't know. But as far as the stimulus package goes, Shiloh Road, Courthouse are pretty important to Billings. In fact, I think the Shiloh Road, Congressman, actually provides an avenue to get to one of your developments. So the fact is that the work that was done out there is critically important as we're going to move forward. I hope we get to the Corette plant somewhere in here, or I will address it later on. Thank you very much.
Senator Tester. Now, Tom Ludy, a question for Representative Rehberg.
Yes, Representative Rehberg. You have criticized the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, but you've also cut the ribbon on a road project that used stimulus money. In February 2009, you credited yourself for securing $42.5 million for Montana projects in that year's consolidated appropriations bill. That's according to your website. And the very next day decried the $410 billion bill for wasteful spending that wasn't scrutinized close enough. You have mostly voted the party line and accused your opponent of voting with Barack Obama 95% of the time, yet you have also said, I agree with the president when he says we need to roll up our sleeves and find workable solutions that put partisanship aside. That comment was made when you asked Democrats Brian Schweitzer, Max Baucus, and John Tester to join you in inviting Barack Obama back to Montana for a 7th time in 2 years so you could talk about the opportunities and challenges facing our great state. Representative, why should Montanans trust that you're the conservative you now suggest you are?
If you think about the budget in America, we spend as much as $4.5 trillion. The difficulty is we bring in $3 trillion and we spend $4.5. Within that, we can set priorities. There's no reason that we can't create an economic stimulus that's truly going to stimulate the economy. It's not my numbers, it's the Wall Street Journal's numbers. Of the $1 trillion that was borrowed against the debt, 12 cents on the dollar went to something that was stimulative. Some of that was the construction projects. The difficulty is the other 88 cents on the dollar went to things that was pure spending. If I go out on my ranch and I need to buy a new stock trailer and it costs $15,000, I better assume that I can return at least $15,000 to $1 or $100 or $500, or it's a pure expense. And that's the problem with the stimulus. It was pure expense. There was stimulative efforts within the stimulus plan, but the problem is it didn't create the jobs. It wasn't timely. It wasn't targeted. It wasn't temporary. It didn't stimulate the economy the way it was intended, and there were other ways to do it. You could have done it through a reduction in the corporate tax of 35 to 25%. You could have done it by suspending the payroll tax on employers and employees for 1 year. That would have cost the same $1 trillion and would have put money in the pockets of every small business in America. The florist, the chiropractor, the engineer, the farmer. They didn't get that. So there's a way to stimulate the economy. This was not the way to do it.
Thank you. Senator Tester, 1 minute.
Yeah, the Recovery Act, you want to talk about what it did? It gave $500 million in tax relief for working families and small businesses. Across the board, $500 million. That's for the state of Montana, by the way. That's not for the whole country. That's for the state of Montana, $500 million. It made it so emergency folks like policemen and firefighters and teachers could stay on the job because states were in equally as bad a shape. Thankfully, Montana was governed by Brian Schweitzer, and he had the state in better shape. But overall, the states were in as tough a shape as the federal government. And finally, an investment in infrastructure. We talked about the courthouse, I talked about the Shiloh Road, but there were infrastructure projects all over the state. I talked to a worker in building curbs and working in water systems when these projects were being awarded. He said, I wouldn't have a job now if not for that. Remember this, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month before the Recovery Act. After the Recovery Act, we saw that flatten out, and then we started to see job creation. We were on the cusp of a financial meltdown. Something had to be done. This was the right move.
Representative Rehberg, 30 seconds.
Nobody suggested that we're not going to spend money. Government is necessary. We want police, we want fire, but those are expenses. If you're going to stimulate the economy, you don't do it with one-time expenses. You have to build, you have to grow, you have to create jobs. And how do you create jobs? By unleashing the small businesses of Montana and America. And you don't do it by piling more debt. We're in our 4th year of over $1 trillion debts in this country, deficits, adding to our debt. And since he's been a United States Senator, it's doubled from $8 trillion to $16 trillion. We cannot continue down that same path.
Thank you. And now a question from Jackie Yamanaka to Senator Tester.
Senator, this current session of Congress has been dubbed by the pundits as the most partisan, least productive in memory. And even with the looming fiscal cliff, and we're talking about the end of the Bush-era tax cuts, as well as the budget cuts, sequestration, members of Congress can't come up with a solution. Why then should Montanans return you to the U.S. Senate? Aren't they just voting for more of the same for another 6 years? What are you going to do to advance your vision for Montana?
Well, Jackie, thank you for the question. I will tell you that the press has reported it correctly. It is very partisan in Washington, D.C. For a Montanan who has seen communities built by people working together, it is very distressing. Quite frankly, Washington, D.C. could learn a lot from us in Montana. We work together, we get things done. We put our differences aside. The Forest Jobs and Recreation Act is a prime example of that, by the way. So, but your question was about me. Why? And I'll tell you why, because I have worked across the line time and time again, whether it's to get capital available for small businesses, whether it's to delist wolves, work with Mike Simpson, a representative out of Idaho, whether it's to make sure that banking regulations fit rural America. And I will continue to do that, and I will continue to work with people in an honest, fair way, the way Montanans do, truthfully, talking to them about the challenges out there, and we will come together. The fact is there's been a group working on the deficit and the debt for some time now, and I have confidence that after the election, we will come to an agreement. Democrats and Republicans, good ideas, both sides of the aisle, and that's how this problem is going to be solved with the fiscal cliff.
Representative Rehberg, 1 minute.
That's why I'm terribly disappointed with my own leadership with the Farm Bill, and I've done everything I possibly can to move it forward, from writing them letters to meeting with them to even signing a discharge petition to try and blast it out of the committee to vote on the House floor. That's why I opposed President Bush on CAFTA, but that's why I voted against the Ryan budget, because I didn't think it protected Medicare enough. I've worked across the aisle. I helped create the Baby Caucus with Rosa DeLauro, a very liberal Democrat from Connecticut, for the specific purposes of looking at children from 0 to 3, for nutrition and education, for early childhood development. I can work across the aisle. That's why I suggest that when you vote with Barack Obama 95% of the time, you can suggest that you were bucking your own party or bucking the president when you vote for rules where everybody in Montana voted or believes in that position. And so do I. But ultimately, on the decisions that mattered most, on things like a failed health care reform, on a failed stimulus, and on energy policy, voting for cap and trade, my opponent has voted with Barack Obama, not bucking his own party, not showing the independence necessary to try and build a more secure future for the people of Montana. He stands more with Barack Obama. I stand more with the people of Montana.
Senator Tester, 30 seconds.
Totally ridiculous. I'm going to tell you that the fact is that if you look at the record, for the last 18 months, the congressman's wanted to run against Barack Obama. They've tried to morph me into Barack Obama. Let me tell you, Barack Obama doesn't want to see the XL pipeline built. I do. Barack Obama didn't see wolves delisted. I got wolves delisted. Barack Obama wanted to see the bailouts. I voted against the bailouts. The list goes on and on and on and on. I put Montanans first in every decision I make because that's what's most important to me, is taking Montana's good ideas back to Washington, D.C., converting it into legislation and getting it passed.
Thank you. And now a question from Mike Dennison to Representative Rehberg.
Good evening, Congressman. You mentioned Medicare. Let's talk about Medicare. You've criticized the Medicare portion in the Affordable Care Act, as you know. You voted against the Ryan budget and in his Medicare plan. So what's your Medicare plan? What's your plan to save Medicare? I haven't heard much about it.
First of all, you don't begin by taking $716 billion out of Medicare. It's already a failing system. We have to do everything we possibly can to make it stronger. And by taking $716 billion out of Medicare, all you're doing is forcing seniors, one, to probably go under Obamacare, which will not work. But it also makes it much more difficult for doctors and hospitals to provide the service to our seniors. The reason I voted against the Ryan plan was because it was a top-down idea. It didn't boil up from the bottom up. It did not protect Medicare recipients. And my number one goal is to preserve and protect Medicare for those that are on it. You don't do it by taking $716 billion out of Medicare and hope that you're going to solve the issue or solve the problem. By Paul Ryan being selected as the nominee, it has done exactly what it should do. It's begun a 50-state debate. Over the course of the campaign, you'll hear more about Medicare reform, and ultimately, I hope we bring the ideas from Montanans back to Washington rather than a D.C.-centric, top-down solution, which is what I thought the Ryan proposal was, and certainly is what the Obama plan is under President Obama's health care reform.
Senator Tester, 1 minute.
Only in Washington, D.C. Only in Washington, D.C. When you cut excessive payments to insurance companies and eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, would that be called a bad thing? The fact of the matter is not one benefit will be cut to our Medicare recipients, not one benefit. The fact of the matter is that we have been reimbursing insurance companies and it has provided no benefits to our seniors. So it's time to stop that reimbursement for the sake of our seniors, to make this program good for generations and generations to come. And I know the congressman doesn't like the Affordable Health Care Act or Obamacare. It extends Medicare for 8 years, and we need to continue to look for ways to make Medicare stronger. It's a safety net that's been around for generations for our seniors. And it's important for our seniors. It works for our seniors. And we ought not be destroying it. And quite frankly, you have not stepped forth with ideas on how to make Medicare solvent for the future.
Representative Rehberg, 30 seconds.
You don't extend Medicare by taking $716 billion out. Did you hear what he said? He said benefits were not going to be cut. That's not the issue. The issue is doctors and hospitals will not be fully and fairly reimbursed for seeing seniors. So when President Obama and Senator Tester say you're not going to lose your insurance under the president's health care reform, no. The problem is somebody may not be able to give you that insurance, or when they say you're not going to lose the doctor of your choice, the difficulty is the doctor may not be able to see you. We must put that back. By repealing Obamacare and by putting the money back into Medicare, we can make it stronger, we can make it last longer, and we can begin the real serious discussion of a bottom-up solution rather than bringing it from Washington down.
Thank you. And now a question from Tom Ludi to Senator Tester.
Yes, Senator Tester. You're frequently referred to as the only working farmer in the U.S. Senate. Yet on trade issues supported by Montana farm groups, you have voted no. Trade, it should be noted, is important to Montana because of the state's $1 billion a year wheat industry sells 85% of its product overseas. The state's billion-dollar-plus cattle economy is also dependent on foreign sales of U.S. beef. You've opposed the South Korean Free Trade Agreement. Korea, incidentally, bought $189 million in non-farm products from Montana in 2010, second only to Canada, according to the State Department of Commerce. And you voted against free trade agreements with Panama, and you've also voted against free trade agreements with Colombia. Explain your opposition to these agreements.
Because the trade agreements have to be fair, not free. And quite honestly, we do have tremendous opportunity, especially in a state like Montana where we raise the best beef and the best livestock and the best grains in the world. But they have to be fair. We cannot allow other companies to dump their product on us at the expense of the folks in production agriculture. And that's what I felt those free trade agreements would do, exactly. But I'm not opposed to trade at all. I think that it's important that we do have trade, but it can't be at our producers' expense. And I felt those trade agreements were skewed towards the countries that you mentioned. And that's why I opposed them.
Representative Rehberg, 1 minute.
Towing the party line. The Democrats asked him to vote against it, he votes against it. I showed the independence. I traveled to South Korea and I learned why it was important for our agricultural producers to open up trade with South Korea, and I voted for it. Panama and Colombia. It was told to us by them, and I traveled to Panama to listen and learn about the trade that could be done with them. You know what's interesting about that with Colombia and Panama and South Korea, which I voted for? Since that time, we've increased our agricultural exports from Montana to those countries by 200%. I also traveled to Australia and learned that it was not in the best interest of our livestock producers. So I bucked my own Republican Party and I voted no. The same is true with CAFTA, with Central American Free Trade. It was going to hurt our sugar producers right here in the Yellowstone Valley and up in Sydney. So I voted against it. I showed the independence of traveling and learning and listening and find out was it in the best interest of our agricultural producers and the rest of our small businesses in Montana to support those trade practices rather than towing the party line. I showed the independence of voting for those that were good for us and against those that I thought hurt Montana. I didn't stand with my party. I stood with Montanans.
Senator Tester, 30 seconds.
Very quickly, I would just say this. President Obama wanted those trade agreements, Congressman. You stood with President Obama on those trade agreements. I chose to do what's right for Montana's producers. And what we're seeing now are prices where we can afford to structure a farm bill, where farmers and ranchers don't have to go to the government to get their check. They can get it from the marketplace.
Thank you. And now a question from Jackie Yamanaka to Representative Rehberg.
Congressman, I'd like to go back to the claim that your opponent votes with President Barack Obama 95% of the time, and you've said it repeatedly tonight that you're a maverick, you're an independent. Now, the Wall Street Journal called you out on that earlier this year. It pointed to the National Journal's political rating system that called you more conservative than 81% of your colleagues in the House. Congressional Quarterly said you joined your GOP colleagues more than 93% of the time each year, except for 2. How is that being a maverick when clearly you're a partisan? Also, can't the argument be made that you're not effective with your own party? You've talked tonight about the failure to get the Farm Bill out of the House. Why then should Montanans send you instead to the U.S. Senate?
There's a difference between voting with Barack Obama 95% of the time in voting on what I believe is in the right interest. When he talks about agricultural producers and what's in the best interest of our agricultural producers, I heard from Montanans, because I traveled to all 56 counties continually, that they wanted the trade practices with South Korea, that they wanted the trade practices. Our wheat producers were losing ground with Canada in Colombia. They told me that, and that's why I voted for those. While at the same time, much to my party's chagrin, I did in fact vote against Central American free trade. The Republicans wanted it. I suggested it was the wrong idea. I'm fighting for the Farm Bill. I do not agree with my own leadership. I'm doing everything I possibly can to try and bring that bill out of committee and onto the House floor. How do they honor me within the Republican side? They've given me a chairmanship of one of the most important appropriations subcommittees. Why? Because of my fiscal conservatism, because I understand the human needs, because I listen and learn and try and help. But I don't stand with President Obama 95% of the time. I stand with Montanans 100% of the time.
Senator Tester, 1 minute.
Well, it sounds to me like you stand with Obama quite a bit of the time, though, because of the trade agreements. I mean, you managed that yourself. Look, you're not the only guy that's been to every county in the state. I go to every county. Last session, I was around every county in the state. That's something you do. Montana's a big state. Montana's expect it. It's nothing out of the ordinary. Let's talk about that Farm Bill. Let's talk about that Farm Bill for a second. Probably one of the most important jobs Congress has to do is pass a Farm Bill. The Senate passed a bipartisan Farm Bill back in June with almost a three-quarter vote for it. Saves $23 billion, offers a safety net for those in production agriculture, and gives food security for the people in this country. It's a bill that makes sense. It goes over to the House. The congressman gives it lip service. It doesn't go any further. Let me tell you, I would still be in session. I would still be in session, would not be on vacation with the Senate until we got that Farm Bill passed if I was in the same boat. Let's talk about the Ryan budget for a second, because it's really important we talk about it. He talks about how he's opposed it, but in his subcommittee, he took the Ryan budget numbers, and that's what he budgeted off of. So let's be honest with the people of the state of Montana. Let's be accountable to them. Let's talk about the decisions you've been making. They have not been responsible.
Representative Rehberg, 30 seconds.
Does anybody in the room believe that I don't want to see a Farm Bill? You agree with it, and I agree with it. But that's not the point. But if you did travel around to 56 counties and you did listen to those that are having livestock disaster assistance, they need drought assistance, they need fire assistance. We passed a disaster assistance livestock mitigation bill through the House of Representatives, and you couldn't get it through. You held it hostage for your 5-year Farm Bill. I want a Farm Bill as well. We agree on that. But if you were listening to the people of Montana, especially in eastern Montana, you know they wanted livestock mitigation. We could have done it. It passed the House of Representatives, and you didn't have the leadership ability to get that bill through. Rather than that, you play politics by holding it hostage.
Thank you, and now it's time for each candidate.
Don't I get a 30 second?
No, that was his 30. That was,
man.
Sorry.
Wow.
Sorry, rule's a rule. Now it's time for each candidate to ask a question of the other candidate. So Representative Rehberg, what is your question for Senator Tester?
Well, once again, I'm going to ask the question. You support President Obama 95% of the time on the major issues, and that's not necessarily standing with the people of Montana. If you listen to the people of Montana, they did not want Obamacare. They did not see how the stimulus was going to work. They do not think that the EPA bureaucrats in Washington should shut down the Correct plant. So the question becomes, why do you think President Obama should be reelected?
Well, the point is this, Congressman, you're running against me. This is the race, okay? You're not running against President Obama, okay? You could have done that, but you chose not to. Look, don't do that. The rules, look, there's plenty of differences between myself and Barack Obama, and tonight I'm starting to figure out there's plenty of similarities between the Congressman and Barack Obama. The fact is that if you go down the list, whether it's rules, whether it's trade agreements, whether it's making sure that the bailouts don't happen, we have set the standard, and we've set the standard by listening to Montanans and doing what Montanans think is correct first. And that's the bottom line. He can try to morph me into Barack Obama because that's who he wants to run again. But look at the record. Look at the record of accomplishment that we've got. Whether it's for veterans or infrastructure, transparency, the list goes on and on and on. And these aren't bills that I just voted for. These are bills that I sponsored. These are bills that I carried. These are bills that I got through. And I do want to talk about that Farm Bill just for a second. That drought assistance that he talked about previously, he said, you got to get that passed through the Senate. Remember when I told you the Farm Bill saved $23 billion we passed in the House? The drought assistance that he wanted cost taxpayers money.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Your minute's up. Mr. Rehberg, 1 minute.
I don't need to morph you into Barack Obama. You did it all by yourself. You listened to what he wanted, and you voted for a failed stimulus. You voted for a president's health care reform that did not reform health care, and you voted for cap and trade, which is nothing more than an energy tax that is going to do two things. It's going to raise the price of our utilities, and it's going to cost us jobs in oil, gas, and coal country of eastern Montana. You supported the EPA and their regulations. They're going to shut down the Corrette plant. That's going to cost 35 jobs. It's going to cost $10 million annually to the city of Billings. It's going to increase your utility costs as much as 25%. It's going to mothball 200 plants around the nation. That's not being an independent voice. What I've tried to do is I've tried to be an independent voice for Montanans by bucking my own party when necessary, when supporting my party when necessary, but ultimately traveling to the 56 counties to find out what the people of Montana want me to do. That's why I voted against the president's health care reform, because it's not going to reform health care. It is necessary, we must reform health care, but if you leave defensive medicine out of it, you haven't done a thing. Ask the people of Montana. They were told their insurance premiums would go down $2,500. They've gone up $2,300. This cost every family in Montana $5,000 for your experiment supporting the president.
Thank you. Senator Tester, you have 30 seconds to wrap up.
Well, thanks, Steve. I would just say this. If anytime jobs are lost with the Corrette plant, that's a bad deal. Absolutely a bad deal. We're talking about EPA regs that have been on the books for 20 years. We're talking about a company that made $1.6 billion in profit last year. The fact is they should invest in that Corrette plant. The problem is, Congressman, is that you bring up stuff and you throw it against the wall and hope it sticks. I did not vote for cap and trade. I voted for a procedural motion to talk about energy policy in this country. And we need to have a debate about that energy policy. We need to have a debate about cap and trade, too, as far as that goes, to make sure it work or not work for this country. Look, there's plenty of things we need to debate about. But for him to stand up here and list off a litany of things, just pull them out of air, is, I guess it's said in the commercial, baloney.
Okay, now Senator Tester, it's your turn to ask a question of Representative Rehberg.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Congressman, you've taken 15 trips in your tenure in Congress, taxpayer-paid trips. Trips to places like Australia and South America and Europe and South Pacific. You've eaten in castles and on boats, meal boats, and gin bars, and dealt with lobbyists, and I'm sure the lobbyists and the special interests got their money from those taxpayer-paid trips. What exactly do the taxpayers of Montana get?
Every trip that I've taken has been for the benefit of the state of Montana. I've traveled to Australia to learn about why they can make the Endangered Species Act work and we can't, and why it was not in the best interest of me to vote for the Australian free trade. South Korea, I learned about South Korean free trade and why it was necessary to have the vote that I did. Why did I travel to places like Europe? You know, I was honored in a bipartisan fashion to travel with Mr. Murtha and Mr. Obi, two of the leading Democrats in the House, to go over and give a keynote speech at Normandy to honor our World War II veterans and point the hawk at the presentation of a new memorial on their behalf. You want to talk about lobbyists? You're the number one recipient of money for lobbyists. Lobbyists, I look out at this room and everybody out here is represented by somebody in Washington, D.C. But the difference is I accept their information, you accept their cash. $1.8 million in the last 2 years from lobbyists in Wall Street. I learn from people, I listen to people, I don't turn around and take their cash while attacking them on the other hand.
Senator Tester, 1 minute.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. From a guy who hid $25,000 in lobbyist money that he should have reported but chose not to be transparent about it, for a guy that's taken tens of millions of dollars from secret money outside because of Citizens United, which, by the way, he supports, the biggest threat to our democracy out there, who's bought commercials for the last year and a half, trying to define me as something I'm not. I think it's rich that he would point this out. Look, you are the one that was a lobbyist, a paid lobbyist. You are the one that told lobbyists that you depend on them to make your decisions. You're the guy who said the revolving door is no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. So it's tough. It's tough when you point a finger at somebody and three fingers are pointing right straight back at you.
Representative Rehberg, you have 30 seconds to close.
I didn't say they make my decisions for me. Everybody in this room is represented by somebody in Washington, D.C. that provides information. I'm not so arrogant, Senator, to believe that I know everything, that I don't have to go out and travel all 56 counties and get around the country and learn a little bit about nuclear waste. and refinement. I went to France and I traveled across France and I learned the entire process because I'm on the committee that has something to do with that. I traveled around America. I went to Georgia and Alabama to learn about coal-fired generating plants from their perspective and coal-to-liquid plants. So I've done everything I possibly can to educate myself, but also to listen to people around America and around the world to ultimately make better decisions rather than going back to my farm every weekend.
Thank you, Congressman. And now, a question from Mike Dennison to Senator Tester. A question from Mike Dennison to Senator Tester.
Senator Tester, we've heard a lot tonight about what people are against. I want to talk about what each of you are for. I'm talking about the fiscal cliff. We have deep spending cuts and tax increases at the end of the year coming up. What is your approach? Why is your approach better for the economy, and why is your approach better than your opponent's approach?
I don't know what my opponent's approach is, but you're going to ask that question to him in a second. Look, the approach has got to be bipartisan. We've got to work together to solve this problem. When we're talking the problem of the debt and the deficit and the fiscal cliff, this comes up the first of the year. There is no doubt that if we don't work together, we are dead in the water. Mike, there have been plenty of proposals out there that make sense for this country, big, broad-based proposals. I've talked about many of them. There were Simpson Bowles and Domenici and Rivlin, and the list goes on and on and on, all sorts of gangs. But the bottom line is those templates can be put together. And it has to have everything in it. Everything has to be addressed. And people need to work together. And I think there's critical mass in the Senate to get it done. And when we talk about the sequestration and the fiscal cliff, that was self-imposed on us in a bipartisan way to get us to work together. It's easily fixed. All we have to do is work together. And it's, like I said in the beginning, it's what Montanans do naturally. In Washington, D.C., we need to learn from Montana.
Thank you. Representative Rehberg, 1 minute.
Well, the first thing we need to do is repeal Obamacare. And that would be the first action. We need to work on a bipartisan solution to the Farm Bill. But what we really need to do, and as I travel around Montana, the number one word I hear more than anything else is certainty. First of all, we need tax certainty. We need to know what our taxes are going to be. I've done everything I possibly can to eliminate the death tax because of my own family situation, where we lived through the death tax, and we lost a third of our ranch, our home, our barns and corrals, and Jan and I have had to rebuild from scratch on 100% borrowed money. We need tax certainty, but we don't need regulations continually dropping down. Sequestration, I voted against the super committee because what a crazy idea to have 12 people go behind closed doors and they're going to solve the fiscal crisis of America. I thought the House of Representatives was a super committee. There's 435 of us. It wasn't going to work in the first place. Sequestration is happening because Senator Tester supported sequestration because he supported the super committee, and it's going to create a crisis at the end of this year. The sequestration is solvable. We will be able to do it. But you know what's interesting? Not only did he take $716 billion out of Medicare under sequestration, another 2% is going to be taken out of America. America cannot withstand that kind of a reduction in Medicare. It's going to destroy the system. Sequestration can't happen. Shouldn't have happened in the first place, and I'll do everything I can to undo it.
Thank you. Senator Tester, 30 seconds
Well,
close.
to listen to the Congressman talk, I'm probably responsible for the drought in the Midwest, too. Here's the deal, Congressman. You voted against sequestration. You voted against 2 years' worth of budget in the Budget Control Act. You also voted to default, for this country to default on our debt, which just about every economist in this country said if that would have happened, it would have driven us into a depression immediately. That was a year ago last August. The bottom line is if we don't start working together in Washington, D.C., we're going to continue to have single-digit approval ratings. And I'd be right there voting with everybody else that it's single-digit. But we have a good nucleus of people back there that have worked together on other issues that are critically important. And I think cooler heads will come together and we'll get this problem solved. And it will be solved in a way that works for our country in the short term and the long term.
Thank you. And now a question from Tom Ludi to Representative Rehberg.
Congressman, what's the biggest lie that's been told about you this election cycle, and what would you say to set the record straight?
Well, I haven't really thought about the biggest lie, because what I really think is I want to be portrayed as somebody who cares deeply about Montana. And I'm not sure that really comes through in the advertising against me, because as I listen and I learn and I travel to all 56 counties, I've tried to be an independent voice. What I try and do is I try and spend my time thinking about how best to represent the people of Montana. Would it have been to vote for a failed stimulus? No. What I would have done is I would have tried to suspend the payroll tax on employers and employees. So every small business in America, including the newspapers, the radio stations, the TV stations that are making all the money on all the advertising against us, would have benefited as well. Every small business could have benefited from that. I wanted tax certainty. I deeply care about the future, not just of our children, but I look at my mom and dad who are in their golden years. And because the investments are not coming back because of the recession, and we're not turning this economy around as much as possible, I care so deeply about trying to change the direction that we're talking about these two avenues. The avenue that the President and my senator opponent has taken, and myself, who believes there's a different path, a better path, one that will create a better opportunity for not just my children, my grandchildren, but my parents as well.
Senator Tester, 1 minute.
Well, I don't really want to keep coming back to the Recovery Act, but remember I told you there was $500 million in tax relief for working families. What creates economy? Demand. That $500 million would go into working families' pockets. They would have more money to spend to create demand. Look, there's plenty of lies that have been said about me from the beginning to the end. For the last 18 months, we've had a continual immersion in them. I guess one of the most interesting one was the one that gave me 5 fingers on my left hand. So you guys can see it's not there. I thought I was going to be able to get him and I could play basketball and be a wide receiver and all that stuff again. Doesn't happen. Hey, last week they sent out a flyer that had my face on the picture on the body of Rick Santorum. Well, it didn't take long to figure that out, if you know what I mean. Okay? So, but the bottom line is this. It's that I pride myself in taking Montana back to Washington, D.C. and working with people. I don't care if they're Democrats, I don't care if they're Republicans, I don't care if they're independents. And it's too bad we didn't have the Libertarian on the stage tonight, because I don't care if it's Libertarians either. The bottom line is it's people work together, and this campaign, his campaign, have tried to make me into something that I'm not in that, and many, many other areas. The fact is you get things done when you work across party lines. Things get done in the middle. They don't get done on the fringes.
Representative Rehberg, do you have 30 seconds?
If you want to talk about false advertising, we'll talk about the fact that they put my head on a silver platter in one of their ads. You can talk about the fact that one of their ads showed me as the Grim Reaper. So everybody's playing that game. It's not unique to he and his and those that are attacking him. But what I find interesting is when we talk about bipartisanship, and he talks about leadership and getting things done, what about the fact that the Senate hasn't passed a budget in over 3 years? Frankly, that's illegal, but it doesn't seem to matter. Let's see a bill, let's see a budget, let's sit down and in a bipartisan way, roll up our sleeves across the table and pound out the differences between the two budgets and do it in a transparent way. You know what's interesting to me? Over the course of 2009, when they had single-party rule, they passed Obamacare, they passed the stimulus, and they passed an additional $1 trillion in spending. That's $3 trillion in new spending, and the Appropriations Committee never met once, not once. We didn't have a single hearing. That means no public input. That meant no opportunity for amendments. That did not give us the opportunity for you to have your say. That's not transparency. That's what we got with single-party rule. We haven't had a budget out of the Senate in over 3 years.
Thank you.
We have. It was the bill you voted against.
And now we have a question from Jackie Yamanaka to Senator Tester.
Senator, Congress has designated a number of tax deductions. Some people call them loopholes. Things like mortgage interest, charitable contributions, or allowing contributions to IRAs or 401ks to be pre-tax, thus cutting an individual's tax bite. Lawmakers often talk about closing loopholes, but it often means standing up to special interests, and this includes the middle class. Do you favor closing loopholes? And if so, specifically which ones?
That's a great question, Jackie. I will tell you that if you take a look at Simpson-Bowles proposal that was brought out a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, it talked about income tax specifically and the fact that income tax brings in $1 trillion. And there's about $1,200 billion, $300 billion put out in tax earmarks. I'll restate what you just said. We can reduce some of those tax earmarks and get down to a point where, quite frankly, we can actually lower the rate and actually bring in more revenue, make it more simple. And I think that's one of the challenges with the debt and the deficit, but it's one of the things that really is an opportunity there too. Look, I'm not for taking away the housing deduction. I think it's critically important for our housing industry. I think it's a critically important economic driver. But I know there are things in that bill. Look, there is there are tax earmarks that have been on the books to the big oil companies. I'm not talking about the drilling costs, tangible drilling costs. I'm talking about tax breaks that have been in the books since 1913 for the Exxons of the world that can be taken off. They're doing fine. But on the other side of the coin, the folks that are out there doing the wildcat and really making a difference, getting the thing, let's look at those. So let's take a look at them from what helps drive our economy and what's really not necessary anymore. If you take a look at, my time's up.
Well,
I'll
thank
come
you,
back to it.
Senator. Representative Rehberg, you have 1 minute.
Unlike my opponent, I do not support Simpson Bowles. You know, how many times have we heard, if you just let us raise taxes, we'll cut spending? You falling for that anymore? Never seems like we get the spending cuts. We always get the tax increase. Simpson Bowles, what does Simpson Bowles do? If you read it, and you read it very carefully, it increases gas tax by 15 cents. It eliminates the home mortgage deduction. How do you like that? It was a promise made when you took out a mortgage, and now you don't know. The value of your home may be all cattywampus in relation to what you will pay in your taxes. I believe in a flat tax. I think that ultimately we can move towards a flat tax. I think we need a simpler system. We need a tax system that is easily done and easily understood, and I would begin by helping those senior citizens with their income taxes for the purposes of making it simpler for them. But I got to tell you, people support reform as long as it doesn't change anything. So it's going to be difficult in this country to work towards tax reform, and I'm willing to do it, and I'm fighting for a flat tax because I think ultimately that is the best way to go.
Senator Tester,
Well,
30 seconds.
Then the question becomes, are those housing deductions, charitable deductions still maintained when you have the flat tax? But that's not the point. I'm going to say something that we actually agree on. If we play politics with this, we'll never get anywhere. We have to work together on this to reform our tax structure in this country. And if we put good heads together, we can get rid of the deductions that make no sense whatsoever and they don't drive our economy and really help us pay down our national debt.
Thank you. And now a question from Mike Dennison to Representative Rehberg.
Congressman Rehberg, let's keep talking about taxes. You just mentioned the federal estate tax a few minutes ago, or as you call the death tax, and your wish to repeal it. As you know, the current tax does not apply to any inheritance income less than $10 million. And also, a family farm and ranch can do some prudent estate planning, usually avoid this tax. So with the nation facing mounting federal debt, why is it a priority for you to cut the income taxes on the few folks inheriting more than $10 million?
Well, first of all, I would correct your numbers because at the end of this year it goes back to $1 million and it goes up to 55%. But if you're going to try and enrich yourself on the inheritance, you're going to have the opportunity to pay your fair share because you're either going to pay a capital gains tax or an income tax. Why does the federal government need or believe it's necessary to cut into the ability of a family to put a business together, a working business that generates revenue, tax revenue, for their public officials? Why do they feel it's necessary? It's not necessary. It's an insidious tax that hurts small business, and it doesn't matter whether it's 10% or 55%, 10 million or 1 million. It's not necessary, it's not right, it's not good tax policy, and it should be eliminated.
Senator Tester.
Well, if you take a look at the fiscal condition we have in this country right now, we have to make choices. My choice is to make sure that we make that $5 million per person, $10 million per couple, 35% tax rate, permanent, have it indexed. We've got a bill to do exactly that so it doesn't drop back. But what's really important, what is really important with inheritance tax, with the death tax, is that it's made permanent. It's bounced all over the place. It's 5 million one day, it's 1 million the next, it's 2.5 the next, it's 700,000 the next, and it's been bouncing all over. You cannot plan for that. If it's made permanent at 5 million and 10, people can plan for it. People in agriculture can plan for it. Small businesses can plan for it. They can buy life insurance if they're over that $10 million figure, and it makes sense for them to do it. But it's got to be made permanent, and I think 5 and 10 is a sweet spot. It exempts almost every, I would say every, but I can't say that unequivocally, but almost every farm and ranch in this state.
Representative Rehberg, 30 seconds.
We don't have a tax problem in this country, we have a spending problem. And if you listen to what he's suggesting that we need to continue a tax on the death of a loved one to feed a government that's out of control. Why don't we control government first? Why don't we come to the realization that we do need permanency in our tax structure? That is what I support. I believe that we should put into permanent effect the tax relief of 2001 and 3. I believe that the death tax should be zero. Why? Because it gives certainty, so we know. And that's the biggest thing as I hear, as I travel around Montana, is they don't know what their taxes are going to be. They don't know the effect of Obamacare on them. Is it going to cost them more to provide health insurance for their employee? Is the employee possibly going to lose their health care coverage from their employer? The whole uncertainty is created by this fiscal cliff because they have backed us into a spending corner that is going to be so hard to dig our way back out of.
Thank you,
Now is the time.
Representative Rehberg. Time's up. Now a question from Tom Ludi to Senator Tester.
Yes, Senator. In April of 2011, you removed wolves from the federal endangered species list in 5 states, including Montana, by placing a rider on a must-pass federal budget bill. The rider banned the public from challenging wolf delistings. The move was decried by environmentalists as a self-interested political move to supplant the Endangered Species Act. And some fear it opened the door for other lawmakers to deny Endangered Species Act protections to politically targeted animals in their states. What do you tell Montanans who voted for you in 2006 but oppose your actions to delist wolves?
Well, there was a recovery effort on wolves, and it worked. We ought to be doing backflips over that. They're recovered. Now we need to manage them. And they no longer need to be on the endangered species list. They are recovered. So let's manage them like we manage elk and deer and bighorn sheep and everything else that's out there in our wildlife. Look, it took a lot of work to get this done. There were a lot of folks out there, the administration being one, that really didn't want to see this happen. But we worked, and we worked together with folks on both sides of the aisle. We worked with conservationists that understood that wolves were recovered, and we worked with folks in the livestock industry and recreationalist hunters out there, and this was the right thing to do. It's fine to make decisions, but you need to go back and monitor those decisions. It really goes back to Jackie's question on tax earmarks. We ought to go back and monitor and see which ones aren't doing right. We went back and monitored. The wolves were on the endangered species list. They were covered. It's time to manage them. And we got that done by working with a Republican by the name of Mike Simpson out of Idaho.
Representative Rehberg, 1 minute.
The wolf recovery is a perfect example of what's wrong with the Endangered Species Act. And I've worked since 2005 when we passed legislation out of the House of Representatives to reform the Endangered Species Act, so we would know what the goalposts were, what the end zone was, so we'd have finality, so we would know when we recovered a species it would be delisted. This was not a decision made by the Obama administration that changed it and made it necessary. It was a judge in Missoula who reversed the position, who changed the future of wolf recovery, changed the goalposts. And so what we ultimately need in this country is we need an Endangered Species Reform Act. You know, you wouldn't have the joke, shoot, shovel, and shut up if it was working. And it's not working. It's not working for the betterment of the endangered species. There's nobody in this room, there's nobody in Montana that wants to endanger a species, that wants the species to disappear from the face of the earth. That's not the point. The point is we need finality, we need certainty, we need to work together to delist it, but turn the management back over to the state. The solution, the compromise that came up is a stopgap. It still allows the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Interior to have an influence over the President of the United States. It should be delisted. The management should be sent back to the states as we had proposed in my legislation.
Senator Tester, 30 seconds.
The problem is this legislation didn't make it out of committee. It's still sitting there. We got a bill that we could get bipartisan support for and get passed. And it was done after talking with sportsmen and livestock producers and conservationists across the board. And it was the right thing to do for the wolves, and it was the right thing to do for Montana. And we got it done.
And now a question from Jackie Yamanaka to Representative Rehberg.
Congressman, I just can't leave the topic of taxes. The argument against raising taxes on the wealthy is that it's going to hurt the job creators. According to the Montana Department of Revenue, just under 1% of Montana households hit that threshold, $250,000 a year. The 2003 Montana legislature cut the top marginal tax rate, and that went into effect in 2005. But economists can find no evidence that this tax cut has led to more jobs. Jobs grew in the 1950s and 60s when the marginal tax rates were higher than they are today. So where are the job creators as the result of tax cuts for the wealthy?
Tax and cut, tax and spend. We Which is better? If you reduce the tax burden, it logically tells you that there will be more money in the economy. Why does the government feel that it needs to take our money away from us if we have the opportunity to invest it in job creation, to try and build a more secure future in our economy? Why can't the government learn to balance its budget? Why can't the government tighten its belt like everyone out here in this audience has to? But this government does not want to. We bring $3 trillion in and we're spending 4.5. We're not going to be able to cut spending enough to balance the budget. We need to grow the economy, and the way you grow the economy is you don't take every last dime out of the economy. You let that money stay in and circulate and grow and create the jobs necessary to ultimately build that more secure future. You cannot continue to tax your way into prosperity. You can't spend your way into prosperity. That's the different path that I have. I don't believe that government is the solution. I think small business is the solution. If you'll just get the government off the backs, if you'll liberate Main Street by reducing the tax burden, by reducing the regulatory burden, you can in fact have more people hired, keep those that already have jobs, and expand our economy. You don't do it by raising taxes during the recession.
Well, the fact is, if you want to talk about job creation and what creates jobs, you're right. It is the small businesses. It's not the multimillionaires like yourself that create the jobs. It's the small business people, and they need to get the deduction. They need to get the reduction. And the working families out there need to get the reduction. The working families are the folks out there that create the demand, that cause more manufacturing and more economy. And quite honestly, we're not talking about not tightening our belts. The belts are going to be tightened in a big, big way as we look for a big, broad-based plan to reduce our debt and deficit. But the fact is that the folks that are making millions and millions and millions of dollars ought to be contributing to the coffers.
Representative Rehberg, 30 seconds.
Feed the beast. That's all they want to do. More government, bigger government, continue the same government. Rather than trying to create the efficiencies, the effectiveness that can be made within those agencies, all they want to do is add more money. I can solve the fiscal crisis. I have legislation introduced that will cut $1.4 trillion over the next 10 years. Don't start 2 new entitlements that exist within Obamacare. What are they? Expansion of Medicaid and the insurance premium subsidy. They don't even exist today. Can you imagine that? We have Social Security and Medicare that's going broke in this country, and we're setting up and creating 2 new entitlements in the president's health care reform. Do the people of Montana know that? Do they believe that? Can they believe that? Does that make any common sense that you create 2 new entitlements at a time when you can't afford it now? Got to quit feeding the beast.
And now a question from Mike Dennison to Senator Tester.
Yes, Senator Tester, you're strongly supported by conservation groups and environmentalists, and Congressman Rehberg is strongly supported by oil and gas and coal interests. For voters looking at that contrast, why should they vote for you?
Because I don't ask them how high to jump and jump. Fact is that if you take a look at the XL pipeline, there's a lot of conservation groups out there that don't want to see that built. I want to see the XL pipeline built. The fact is we talked a little bit about regulation here tonight. Look, there needs to be a level of regulation out there, but it can't be crazy. And so we need to insert a little Montana common sense into that as we move forward. Sometimes I buck the conservation groups in that, and well should. And sometimes I buck other entities, because the fact is we have to do what's right for Montana in this country, and that's exactly what I do. And my record is proven on that. Whether it's wolves, there's another one. You know, some of the conservation groups weren't crazy about that, but we did it because it was the right thing to do.
Senator Tester is the #1 recipient of lobbyists and Wall Street money. In the last 2 years, $1.8 million. Yes, I am supported by the oil, gas, and coal industry. And I guess I'd ask you, who produces and provides more jobs in the state of Montana, the oil and gas industry or Wall Street? The oil and gas industry does. They support me because they clearly know that if we're going to help build that more secure future for Montana and pay for much of our schools and other public services, it comes out of the oil, gas, and coal fields of eastern Montana to be sent to Helena to be redistributed. Some of the areas that are strongly supporting him through the environmental movement. So the question becomes, is there a balance? I'm a rancher by trade. And I clearly understand you need economic development, but you also need conservation. My favorite book is Holistic Resource Management by Alan Savory. And what is that? There's a clear understanding there's going to be intensive uses. Those are mines or those are corrals. And then you're also going to protect areas, hieroglyphics and such. There are going to be areas where you want to protect the wildlife, but there are areas where you need to make a living. And that's where sometimes the extreme environmentalists don't understand that those of us in Montana need to make a living. And so I'll stand with the oil, gas, and coal counties and the people of Montana in trying to produce the jobs that are produced by those industries.
Senator Tester, 30 seconds.
Well, if you think Wall Street loves me, it's interesting. I didn't bail them out, and I put cops on the beat to make sure they didn't screw up a bill that you did not vote for, by the way. So the fact is, you can, once again, you can pull this stuff out of air and throw it around, but it just doesn't meet the test of truthfulness. Look, we need to have everything: agriculture, oil and gas, natural resources. That's why I got a forest jobs and recreation bill that he has stopped in the House, so we can put people to work in the woods, cutting trees, and have mills have a consistent supply of timber, and we have recreation. Our recreation economy is $3 billion a year in this state, to make sure we got opportunities for recreation out there. So don't tell me it can be just one industry. It's got to be a whole bunch of industries out there.
Thank you.
Moving forward and making sense for this state and this country.
Thank you, Senator. Now we've run out of time for questions, so we'll now give each candidate 2 minutes for a closing statement about their campaign to be Montana's representative in the U.S. Senate. Senator Tester will go first, followed by Representative Rehberg, who will have the last word.
Well,
Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I want to thank you and the panel and everybody that's here in the auditorium tonight and everybody that's watching on TV and listening on the radio. I appreciate your interest in this race. How many people in this audience are from the city of Billings? Raise your hand. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Congressman Rehberg has sued each and every one of you. No, please. And I want to tell you something. I've talked about Montana a lot tonight and people working together. And the first thing you do when firefighters come and you got a grass fire and they put it out and they burn the bushes and they put their butt on the line is you don't respond and say thank you by filing a lawsuit with monetary damages, which is exactly what he did. That's not working together. That's not building the state of Montana. That's not moving your community forward. Look, it's been a pleasure for the last 6 years to be able to represent the great state of Montana and meet some incredible people. People like Tommy Parker, a veteran of the Afghanistan war. In fact, he's still in the active military. Lost both legs and the best part of his left hand to an explosion. And to see Tommy Parker in his outlook on life and how he wants to go forward, and he'll have prosthetic legs at some point in time, and be able to move forward. Those people give me the drive for this job. A person like Lisa Jones, who is a cancer survivor, somebody who went to a Title X clinic, a community health center, that wouldn't have been there if the congressman had gotten his way and got a cure for her cancer. Critically important because she got that early screening. Those kind of people motivate me. Look, we've got a great record of what we've done in the Senate in the last 6 years. We've been able to work across party lines. We've been able to do some good things. There's far more things to do here. There's issues of our national debt, and there's issues of jobs. There's issues to access to public lands. There's issues of women's health care, making sure that women can make their own health decisions. All these are critically important as we move forward. And you're going to get your absentee ballot starting tomorrow. And you're going to vote on November 6th. Hope everybody in here does. I'd appreciate your vote.
And now, Representative Rehberg, your 2-minute close.
To the people of Billings, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to represent you both in the state legislature and the United States Congress. You know, I've traveled around Montana over the course of the last 2 years, all 56 counties, and nobody has brought up the fire except for you. You know what they talk about? They talk about the irresponsible decision-making that goes with supporting President Obama 95% of the time. On things like the Obamacare, on things like the failed stimulus. And the people of Billings, you want to know where the monetary loss is the loss of the Corette plant. When it shuts down, you lose 35 jobs, and you lose $10 million per year to your schools and your government at the local level. That's the real cost of what his policies are bringing us by supporting bureaucrats in Washington. You've got 2 paths. You've got 2 candidates. We are going to begin voting on a next United States Senator starting tomorrow. One neighbor at a time. You've got 2 avenues to take. One is a government solution that believes that government can bring you a job. And me, who believes that we can revitalize, re-energize, redo, and renew the enthusiasm for America and Montana if we just get government out of our way. Government is creating the uncertainty, both in our tax structure and our regulatory policy. And it's not just small businesses that are going to turn this economy around. It's those who work for those businesses who are also going to help us renew the enthusiasm of creating a more secure future, a better opportunity for ourselves, our children, our businesses. So as I travel around Montana, I look people in the eye, and I don't see statistics. We don't necessarily want to talk about the unemployment rate statewide. There are 56 counties with 56 unique personalities, with 56 cultures and histories, and their own desire for their own future. And in Liberty County, it might be agriculture. In Lincoln County, it might be timber. And in eastern Montana, it might be oil and gas and coal. But I want to get government out of the way. I want to have people have the opportunities, the same opportunities that we had and our parents had. And when I ask people, will your children have the same opportunity, they don't have that same enthusiasm. I want to return that enthusiasm to America, to Montana, to Billings, to Yellowstone County, building a more secure future for the people of Montana by getting government out of the way.
Thank you. God bless you all.